Welcome to Big Blend Radio's Military Monday Show with Mike Guardia, award-winning author and historian. Welcome, everybody. You know, every first Monday we get to chat with Military Mike. Mike Guardia is an award-winning military history author. He's an historian, he's a teacher, he's an educator, and every first Monday I get a good dose of history, a great history lesson from him. And today we're going to learn about the Battle of Okinawa. And I'm glad he said, let's do this as a topic, because I realized I need some brushing up on this, because I didn't even know where to really fit it in the timeline of history. I think a lot of times, maybe some of us, maybe it's just like me, we start thinking more towards Vietnam, but this was really part of World War II, and he's going to talk about that. And also it connects with some of his books, American Armor in the Pacific, the Combat Diaries. The Combat Diaries, everyone needs to get this. True stories from the front lines of World War II. And it also touches on one of my favorites, which is Coyote Recon, which really focuses on Jay Vanderpool. So welcome back, Mike. How are you?
Hey, Lisa, I'm doing great. Always a pleasure to be on the show.
Hey, it's good to have you back. And what's going on with the History Channel? Before I forget, like, we can't forget the History Channel.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, so let's see. This past spring, they wrapped up season one of Military Mysteries, and that is a brand new that is a brand new show that aired on the History Channel. The show itself has been greenlit for at least 4 seasons. We just
Cool.
finished up season one in May. And Military Mysteries is actually a rebranded spinoff of the Proof is Out There. Some of your listeners probably remember Proof is Out There for being the show that was very into aliens, extraterrestrials, and tales of the supernatural. So what they've kind of done with the History Channel is they've done something akin to what the network television studios have done with NCIS. You know, you have NCIS, the original one, then you have or excuse me, you have you have CSI. You have the original CSI in Las Vegas, then you got CSI in Miami, CSI New York. Well, they're doing this latest iteration is, you know, the Proof is Out There, Military Mysteries, and just diving into many of the greatest unexplained and unsolved mysteries that deal with military operations around the world and across all sections of history. These can run from anything from mysterious disappearances to unexplained phenomena that have influenced the outcome of military operations, to just plain bizarre and uncanny coincidences that make you scratch your head, and things that give your everyday conspiracy theorist a field day in trying to gin up all these alternative explanations. But the show was a blast to be on. I was featured in 4 of the initial 6 episodes that aired in this first season, and incredible experience. We got to talk about a lot of things that remain very thought-provoking and mysterious to this day. Since you can get any one of the episodes available on demand, either through history.com or even on Amazon Prime. One of the episodes that I can give an overview of is involving a mysterious occurrence that happened at the onset of Desert Storm. This was this was British Airways Flight 149 that landed in Kuwait City right as Iraqi forces were invading in August of 1990. And the prevailing theory is that British authorities let that plane travel into Kuwait City unobstructed, while other airliners were being diverted to other airports. They let this one plane land because it was a Trojan horse, in a matter of speaking, to get some valuable British SAS agents on the ground, to set up reconnaissance and surveillance posts inside Kuwait City to keep an eye on the disposition of Iraqi troops. And there's a prevailing further assumption that aside from using this British Airways flight as a Trojan horse, that as soon as Iraqi forces realized it was a British Airways flight, well, Saddam at this point has no beef with the British Empire, so he'll say, okay, well, it's just your everyday commercial jetliner, so we'll just let it go.
Mm.
And yeah, that turned out not to be the case, because after the so-called military passengers disembarked from the plane, all of the civilian passengers stayed on board. They were impounded by the Iraqi forces, and they were held prisoner until shortly after the conflict.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Good stuff. I mean, what you're covering. I mean, really, it's fascinating. And so everyone keep up with the History Channel. You were saying if you go online, right? If you don't have to watch it on TV itself. There's also it's what we say VOD, video on demand, so you can stream it and all of that. Okinawa, let's get to that. So refresh us about this battle, because I went, looking it up. I'm always like, I better start learning before Mike comes, and then Mike gets on there and corrects me. So it's always good. No, it's always good. I like being the one who needs to be taught here. But the Battle of Okinawa, um, as far as I was reading, uh, Operation Iceberg, and this was part of the Pacific War, right? On the island of Okinawa, U.S. Army and the Marine Corps
Mhm.
against the Imperial Japanese Army. So I want to just touch on the Imperial Japanese Army side. I know we've talked about this before, and actually, I find it really fascinating because we had a lot of Japanese in our country at the time, also known as the Imperial Japanese, and it's especially out in California into Yuma, Arizona, the desert area. They were doing a lot of gardens and things, and I think we touched on when I was talking about the Velveli, the doll woman spy, was helping the Japanese. She infiltrated in between. She was friends with the Imperial Japanese. And so when we think of the Imperial Japanese Army, it's not something we hear of today, the imperial words. Can you tell us what that's about?
Yeah. So this actually comes at a critical point in the history of modern Japan. And they had, as a matter of fact, if we go back towards the 1500s and the 1600s, right as Japan was coming out of its feudal era, where you had the shoguns and the samurais who were creating their own little mini feudal societies in there. When Japan
Mm,
emerges from its isolationist stance and starts to reestablish trade and normal everyday commerce and diplomatic relations with not only other Asian countries but also with the West. You also see a trend that's on the rise throughout most of the 1800s, right as the samurai class really starts to lose its power and muscle. That Japan comes into the industrial age, and as they transition from one period to another, the imperial government is still pretty strong. You have the emperor, who is for all intents and purposes, a divine ruler who the Japanese people regard as pretty much nothing less than a god, who is at the head. And he's saying, okay, well, now that we are entering into the industrial age, we're going to take the same spirit of the samurai warriors and the same spirit
oh,
of the shogunate, and we are going to make a modernized version of that. And you really see this manifest itself most vehemently, I guess I'll say, in terms of the military, because when you have a modernization of the Japanese military, you have You have a subsequent you have a subsequent perversion, I guess is the best way to describe it.
Oh,
A perversion of the Bushido warrior code, which is the way of the samurai. They had taken that to an extreme, to where the old school um, the
oh,
old school middle-aged version of the samurai warrior code always stressed compassion and treating your opponents with dignity in defeat. They turned it into something that was more akin to what you would see in the Cobra Kai dojo at the Karate Kid, where it's kill
yeah.
first and show no mercy, strike first, strike hard, and kill or be killed. So at around this time, you have an aggressive projection of this Japanese military power, and you see that manifest itself in the Russo-Japanese War of 1905, and then again with the annexation of Korea in 1910. And then, of course, everything hits critical mass in the 1930s when they project outward and invade Manchuria. So the imperialism really is taking what was formerly an inward-looking empire, and eh, and you have these two forces that were going in tandem at the start of the Industrial Revolution, where you're not only rapidly industrializing Japan's
Mm,
military and Japanese society, but you're also pushing for this aggressive exporting of this aggressive and um, this very aggressive and bastardized version of the Bushido warrior code. So
wow.
that's how you have the whole imperial stance there. And as Japan is expanding, they of course get stopped by the Allied counter movement at the end of World War II, and then after the fall of the Empire of Japan, the prevailing thought is, okay, well, Japan can keep its emperor, but the emperor is going to be little more than just a figurehead. He's not really going to have any power per se. There's going to be a new constitution, so we're getting rid of the old Meiji area,
Mm-hmm.
and we're starting a new westernized style of a constitutional monarchy, where most of the power is going to be in the hands of the prime minister. And not only is Japan going to give up all of its extra territorial possessions, but at the same time, it's going to be a mentality of pure self-defense. And they said, okay, we're going to take anything having to do with empire and imperial out of all of the official Japanese literature. This is now just a constitutional monarchy. Yes, there is a quote unquote emperor, but he's not presiding over an empire. He's just presiding over the
Mm.
Japanese mainland, and everything having to do with the Japanese military is going to be officially titled the Japanese Self-Defense Force, and that's going to be pervasive throughout every branch of the military. You're going to have the Japanese Ground Self-Defense Force, which is going to be their army. Then you have the Air Self-Defense Force. We are not going to we're not going to officially acknowledge any type of expeditionary capability at all. It's all going to be based on homeland defense, and this was done deliberately
Mm.
because they wanted to make sure, like, hey, no, the Japanese are not going to have an opportunity to do what they did before, just given the severity and the brutality of what they did in places like Manchuria, and what they had done to the Koreans for generations, and what they had done in Hong Kong, and even in the even in the lower parts of the CBI theater. It was just a liability that nobody really wanted to have on their hands at that point.
Wow. So this battle, am I right, is like it was almost 3 months, right, in length.
Yeah.
And the Okinawa, and it was an invasion of Okinawa. And so am I right? It was the largest amphibious assault in the Pacific theater of World War II. Thank you, Wikipedia, by the way. Just, this is Wikipedia versus Mike. This is please no,
It was.
but this is the point. But I mean, this is a big deal when you look at it. I mean, um, so when we think about who was doing the fighting from our side, so this was all U.S. or did anybody else help America in this battle?
Yes. So America was really providing the main thrust of the attack here, and we were of course the heaviest concentration of forces, but it really was an allied effort. Of course we had British troops with us. We also had some Anzac forces with us there as well. Anzac being Australian and New Zealand Corps, and we also had a contingent of Canadians with us as well. So it really was an allied effort. The U.S., of course, providing the brunt of the assaulting force.
Okay, so now we go in and we attack this. What started like what was I mean, this was planned, right? This was
Well,
kind of a planned thing, so everyone
mhm.
knew we were going in, and but this was, kind of at the end, like the end of World War II. It was kind of like one of the last battles. Am I right on that? Or
That's
I'm
right.
trying to
Yeah,
think. Okay.
it for all intents and purposes, it really was the last battle of the Pacific War, and it
Okay.
was really in a lot of ways the most critical, because what we had adopted as a strategy early on in the conflict was the idea of island hopping, and we wanted to gain control of many of these strategic islands throughout the Pacific. We wanted to pacify these islands, and we wanted to get them under our control. And we wanted to focus our attention on these major islands that could be strategically capable of supporting our drive to the Japanese mainland.
Mm,
Now we knew that in order to accomplish this, we couldn't occupy every single island out there. So we had to pick where the most strategic ones were, and we also had to figure out which islands we could afford to bypass. So if you take a look at the trajectory
mm,
of the entire Pacific campaign, you really see that it's those big land. It's really those big land masses, and I say big in relative terms, but ones that were capable of supporting our drive. So we of course started off with Guadalcanal and also Midway, and once we had a solid foundation at Guadalcanal, then we started looking outwards towards more islands that could support our drive. And this led to operations on Guam and Tarawa and Saipan, anything that could put us in a strategic position to vector our forces towards the Japanese
hmm
mainland and support an eventual invasion of the Japanese homeland. And Iwo Jima, for as bloody as that was seen as really the last key stepping stone en route to Okinawa, because Okinawa was the biggest island that we could use as a staging area for all of our forces for a very easy invasion of Japan. And of course, I say easy in the sense that it would be very quick to get there, since
hmm
distance was really what the Japanese were relying on. But once we had Okinawa, we knew that we had a very close and very utile place upon which we could stage the invasion force for the Japanese homeland. Now, the Japanese, for their part, they knew this too. They knew that
mm,
Okinawa was going to be the prize, and that's why they were prepared to defend it to the death. They had put so much into trying to keep us off of Iwo Jima, because they know that once the Americans take Okinawa, that's it. It's pretty much going to be game over, and we'll have to start digging trenches along the beaches of Honshu and Hokkaido. Uh,
wow.
so so the pressure was on for both the Allies and the Axis, and
hmm
more so for the Japanese, because they were pretty much in full panic mode by this point. They knew that Germany was on the losing end, and it was right in the middle of the Battle of Okinawa that Germany officially surrendered. and just given the way that the war was headed in Europe, the Japanese knew on some level what we knew all along was that Germany could win the war without Japan, but Japan couldn't win the war without Germany. So this was the Hail Mary to say, okay, well, we're going to give everything we have to defend these last
Mm.
two chunks of rock in the Pacific, Iwo Jima and Okinawa. And that's where you really see some of, I think, the bloodiest fighting. And of course, uh, fighting was bloody everywhere throughout the Pacific. I don't think anything could top Tarawa or Saipan, but you really see just the desperation of the Japanese when the Allies hit the shore of Okinawa. And just to give some of the listeners out there an indication of how bloody it was, not only for the soldiers that were involved, but
Mm.
also for also for the also for the local civilians on Okinawa as well, because the Okinawans, a lot of them were forcibly conscripted into the Imperial Japanese Army. So you had more than 100,000 Japanese and Okinawan casualties on the island. And granted, this is a very small island in a battle that lasted only about 3 months. And just
Wow.
to put that in terms of perspective, 100,000 casualties. I mean, we didn't even lose a tenth of that number in a 20-year war that we fought in Afghanistan. And within 3 months, we're talking 100,000 casualties on one small podunk island in the Pacific. It's almost hard to wrap your head around. And
Wow.
and
Yeah.
aside from those casualties in uniform, some local authorities have estimated that upwards of 150,000 Okinawan people were killed. Either they were killed in the crossfire, or they actually they, they actually committed suicide. This one of the this was
Yeah.
one this is one of the more I'll say peculiar things about Japanese and Okinawan culture is that suicide is very often seen as an acceptable um, as an acceptable happenstance, really, because they, in a way they've almost formalized it, and in many cases they've also ritualized it as well.
Mhm.
Um, they uh, they they had a formal suicide ceremony among many high-ranking officers, to where if you felt like you were being disgraced in battle, or if you were defeated, or if you were about to be captured by the enemy, you could commit the ceremonial seppuku, and uh,
Wow.
you could take a short sword and stab yourself in the gut, and that would be seen as a more honorable way to end your life than than,
Captain.
than being captured and being
Wow.
humiliated. And also for the everyday civilians, it was also seen as preferable. They said, okay, well, if I'm going to retain the honor of my family and the honor of Japan, or the honor of whatever it is, I'm interested in keeping the dignity of,
Yeah.
then I have a problem, jumping off one of these rock cliffs to my death, because that's going to be preferable than being captured by the Americans. And you really see a projection of values in a sense, because some of the Japanese and Okinawan POWs who were later interviewed by American forces, they said, the local authorities told us that you guys were going to come in the same way we always did. You would be burning and raping and pillaging and looting, and we were
Right.
scared. We were scared that the Americans were going to do the exact same thing to us. But we were surprised that you Americans did not treat us that way at all. You just wanted this conflict to be over, and you wanted everybody to get back to their normal lives. So it's
It's wild. That's
it's
wild. Yeah. I,
wild in the
I,
sense of projection, and also the sense of, wow. I mean, the cultural disinformation and lack of knowledge there it is really just astounding.
what's it, when you go back to the suicide, it's almost like we also don't want you to claim that you won over our body. It's kind of like a pride as well. Like, I don't want to be, I'm going to kill myself instead of you because I want my team to win versus you being able to put a check mark next to my name like you got me. You know what I
Right.
mean? It's kind
Hmm.
of like yeah, it's like you can't really count that it's a casualty of war, right? But you
Right.
can't really, the Americans can't really say, okay, we did that, even though they kind of did. It's kind of an odd thing there. Do you think, I mean, because this was one of the bloodiest battles, right? One of the, like, what I was reading was like, it's known as the Typhoon of Steel, the battle, that it was one of the hardest fighting battles, like in regards to it was the amount of casualties. I mean, just on the Allied side and then also the Japanese side, but the Allied's not as bad, right? Because it was
Hmm.
really, really brutal, really bloody. But with that, I mean, we talked also about, just the Japanese way of fighting. We've talked about that before, where they were pretty brutal and in torture chambers. So I kind of think like how they tortured, you know, in POW camps and things like that, that because they know what they did, that they also had a fear that we would be as bad to them because they
Yeah.
know what they did. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? It's like you have fear of somebody or you don't trust someone because you already know how to do what you think they could do, even though they're not doing it or don't even have the thought of doing something, but because you've done something. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? If you've done something, you already know how to do it. You go, oh, that person could do this. So therefore you don't trust them, which is
Right.
insane, but it's because you already know. We do that as humans because at
Hmm.
the end of the day, you know, war is still down to how humans handle it and do it, you know?
Yeah.
So that emotional intelligence side, I wonder about that with the suicide that they go, we don't want you to have what we do to people. Because they were
Right.
pretty brutal. And isn't that part of the fear of the Japanese at that point was how brutal they were at
Of
that?
course.
And I mean, this country had, I mean, it's, it is sad. And, how, people were, put into the Japanese internment camps. So it's a really hard road to go. But at the same time, there's this flip side of the Japanese were not that nice at the time, but the people here were fine, but maybe not. I'm going to get in trouble. Mike, am I going to get in trouble? Whatever I say, I'm going to get in trouble. But really, in historically speaking, the Japanese military, if they're going to get you, they're going to get you, you know?
Mhm.
So there was some fear on the American side, I think.
Yeah.
So, but the people here maybe didn't have anything to do with it. What do you think on the people living in America that were Japanese? That's that part of it. Um,
Yeah. You know,
it's
it's
complex. How about
it,
that word?
it's complex, and it's actually kind of sad because this is actually something that is actually something I touched on briefly when I was writing Coyote Recon,
Mm,
because in Hawaii, even way back in 1941, you had a very sizable population of Japanese Americans who lived
sure,
there. And this was the same all throughout all throughout the West Coast, particularly California, um, where you had a very sizable population of Japanese Americans. And yes, Japan was their ancestral homeland, but they really didn't feel much of a tie, and they didn't feel much of a pull in that direction across the Pacific. They were, as loyal Americans as anybody else. And what Jay Vanderpool noticed right in the immediate aftermath of Pearl Harbor was that a lot of young Japanese American men who lived in Hawaii, these were the firstborn American citizens of Japanese immigrants, that these young Japanese American men were going to the recruiting. They were going to the recruiting stations in droves because, and he even said this. He even said this in one of his letters. Vanderpool said that, oh man, these young Japanese kids, they were furious at what the Empire of Japan did. that
Hmm.
they were just eager as anybody else, to they were eager as anybody else just to go overseas and lick those bastards. Um, and he said it was sad because he could see how eager they were, but so many of them were turned away from the recruiting stations, just based on the fact that uh, these that these potential recruits were
Mm-hmm.
Japanese, and they said, well, hey, how do we know you're just not an enemy agent? How do we know you're not a spy? And it was a policy that held firm for quite a while until they allowed some Japanese Americans to enlist, and then they had that segregated unit, the 442nd, which fought in
Yeah.
Europe. And what was almost humorously ironic about it was that the 442nd Regiment, being staffed almost entirely by Japanese American soldiers, you had more medals of honor per capita come out of the 442nd than any other unit that fought in the war.
Mm. See, that's it. That's
Yeah.
I actually interviewed someone with their relative was in that, I think. And I mean, that's why it goes to all these layers, right? Did Jay Vanderpool actually was he in the Battle of Okinawa? He was in a couple other different ones, right, as I recall. But
He was.
it was
Yeah.
after Pearl Harbor.
Yeah. So he had survived Pearl Harbor, and he fought on Guadalcanal. He also fought in the Battle of New Britain, and then it was right after that battle that he volunteered to be an allied liaison to the guerrilla movements in the Philippines. And yeah, he was one of the commandos who infiltrated the Philippines by submarine. And then it was after the Philippines fell, he was able to rejoin his former unit. And even he was commenting on how a lot was going to hinge on the success of Okinawa. And he says, thank God that we dropped the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki at that point, because we were getting ready to invade the Japanese homeland. And he said, I don't think people appreciate just how bloody this was anticipated to be. I mean, the casualty projections said that we were going to be losing one regimental commander per week if
Oh
we
my gosh.
if we invaded the Japanese homeland. And you have to think to yourself, okay, a regimental commander, we're talking about a full bird colonel, somebody who is typically not directly on the front lines, but usually, one or two echelons behind, who's organizing and directing the troops. I mean, that doesn't mean that a regimental commander is never exposed to fire. But, if you're thinking in terms of, okay, we're losing somebody who's that high up on the echelon ladder every week, oh my God,
Yeah.
this is not only going to be bloody, this is going to be brutal beyond anybody's expectations. To say nothing of the fact that people were digging ditches along the beaches of Hongshu, and and regular civilians were being issued pitchforks to attack incoming paratroopers. I mean, this was
That's
going to be, yeah, I mean, we were expected to fight, house to house, block by block. I mean, try to
wow.
imagine the Battle of Stalingrad times 10, and that'll give you
Well,
some vague idea of how brutal it was going to be.
so my thing with this, what we're in Japan, we're doing all these different things, going different places, right? We're island hopping, like you're saying.
Yeah.
And we go from World War II, right, to the Korean War. Am I missing one in between there? I feel like I am. What was in
No.
between? Okay.
So, yeah, from World War II, it was pretty much a straight shot to Korea. We did have the Berlin airlift, though. So that was
Okay, because
it moment of Cold
that's
War.
what's interesting to me because I'm going, huh, are what hmm, do you think there's like a tie between them all? Like they're like, okay, we just, finished the Pacific Theater part of World War II. It's ended. Now we're going right into the Korean War. But now we're talking about Asian lifestyle, right?
Yeah.
In that we're now learning these countries that are different than America. Now we've understand this side. Now we're going into Vietnam, Korea. So then we've kind of got our boots a little bit on the ground there and understand that. So there's like this generation. So it's kind of like if we look, everyone's like, okay, the greatest generation is leaving. But then there is the generation at the end of World War II that came in and fought, right? And then may have moved on to Korea, the Korean War into Vietnam. Did that happen with some of the soldiers? Do you
Um,
think?
well, not I'm not exactly sure what you mean,
Okay. So in
as
other
in
words, like
they
if
fought
you
in.
were, yeah, if you fought in, I mean, it's my time because I mean, I'm trying to think of the timelines. I need to look it up, but the timeline going from the end of World War II, how
Yeah,
far was it between like, oh, now we're in Korea, the Korean War is happening, and
it
which always
it,
gets overlooked.
was only 5 years. So yeah, World War
Yeah.
II did in 45, and then the Korean War kicked off in 1950. So you did have quite a lot of overlap. I mean, there were a lot of veterans from World War II who also fought in Korea. But you also had a very young strata of soldiers who this was their first conflict. And as a matter of fact, I can think of the first example that comes to mind is actually Hal Moore,
Oh,
because
wow. Oh,
yeah,
yeah, yeah,
because
that's right.
because that was the first conflict. He graduated from West Point right as World War II was ending, and he was among that group of young soldiers and young officers who were silently commiserating, thinking, "Oh my God, I really missed the big one, and there's never going to be another war for as long as I'm alive. But knock on wood, here they are 5 years later, and they are on the front lines of Korea. And there was a lot of overlap there. But
Hmm.
yeah, I want to zero in on that young generation of soldiers who fought on the front lines in Korea, and that was their first time in uniform. That was their first time in combat. This is the generation that I think most social scientists would call the silent generation, because they're not quite the greatest generation. They were too young to fight in World War II, and their service in Korea was really where they cut their teeth and made their big contribution on the world stage. But they're also overshadowed by all of the early baby boomers who fought in Vietnam. So you have Korea itself as the conflict that is between the two major bookends of World War II. The greatest conflict in human history, and then you have the bitter malaise of Vietnam that is the other bookend. And in
Wow.
in an analogy that is probably going to trigger a lot of people out there, the Korean War is kind of the middle child of that situation, and the Korean War veterans also find themselves dealing with something that I think would be akin to that middle child syndrome. It's like, okay, well, our big brothers and our uncles and our cousins all fought in World War II, and here's our first chance to get in on the action. We fight in Korea. We basically fight the communists to a draw, and then our contributions are quickly overshadowed by all of these first round baby boomers who are fighting on the front lines in Vietnam, and they get all the press coverage in a negative light. It's a 180-degree difference from from our elder brethren who fought in World War II. And here we are in the middle. We've got the problem children on one end, we've got the golden children on the other end, and we are the forgotten children here in the middle. And yeah,
Hmm.
that I think has stuck with a lot of veterans, but they're just not as vocal about it. And it's an interesting subtext, because what that reminds me
Yeah.
of, if you've ever seen the movie First Blood, um, that
Hmm.
what was the that what was the first film in the Rambo series,
Hmm.
and First Blood itself was actually based on a novel. Yeah, what was a novel about John Rambo, And the novel actually gets very deep into the character analysis and the psychological analyses of how all of the principal players play. And if you read the book and then you see the movie, it explains a lot about how some of the other people in the film, aside from John Rambo, actually operate and why they think the way they do. And there's a subtle nod to this in the film, and I really wish that they had expanded more on this because one of the scenes, the character that was played by Brian Dennehy, the corrupt Sheriff Teasel, one of the scenes where he goes into his office, you actually see you actually see a decoration on the backside of his desk, and it it is a small shadow box that has a few medals from the Korean War,
Mm,
and find out is that Will Teasel himself was a Korean War vet. He was an infantryman and he was wounded on the front lines in Korea. And so he knows what it's like to be in combat. He knows about those horrors. He's seen it firsthand himself. But what the novel explores that the movie doesn't is that Will Teasel himself actually harbors a lot of those same resentments. He says, okay, well, I fought for my country, and I spit blood the same as the guys before me in World
hmm.
War II, but those guys came home to the ticker tape parades and everybody cheered on them. And then all the younger guys who went off to Vietnam, they caused all the trouble. They got all the negative press reaction. So you got the problem children over here, you got the golden children over here. But guys like me who went to Korea and came back, they completely ignored us. It's like we didn't even exist.
Right.
Yeah, so that explains his psychology of how he's so antagonistic towards Rambo throughout the film, because he sees Rambo as the embodiment of those Vietnam veterans, the problem children who got all the negative press coverage, while here I am, Mr. Forgotten Korean War veteran, and I'm just a small town sheriff who who has to trudge through all of his daily duties, and where's my recognition? So yeah,
I
it's a
that's
very interesting subtext that made itself into pop culture.
that's what I was trying to ask you about that because I kind of felt
Yeah.
like, going from Okinawa, like I feel like that battle got left off the books in and us all knowing. Maybe because I wasn't around then, so maybe if you were watching the news and knew what was going on, you know more, So it could just be me and my generation and, my education, right? Everybody comes to knowledge at different times, period, right? Um, but in reading up on Okinawa, when you said, "Oh, I want to do Okinawa," I was like, "Okay." And I was like, "I know that there was a battle, but I have no clue." I'm just like, "Okay." Like, and honest to God, I think I thought it was like part of the Vietnam War, because that's just, that is dumb mentality, Lisa's dumb mentality that goes there. And then I was like, "Oh my gosh," right? And so then I'm like, I didn't know this. I think if we were taught in school, it was probably that one tiny paragraph in there,
Mhm.
you know, and not like this should be an entire class, you know. It shouldn't
Yeah.
just be, and I think it's because you don't get to know about the people. It's always this war happened. And so again, what I love about what you do, Mike, is you tell it from the people, the soldiers' perspective, the nurses in combat, all these different people, the pilots, the people on the ground, the combat engineers. You tell the stories of the people, and through that you get to understand what the battle was about. If you just go, okay, this bit, we blew up this, we did this, we did this. Well, number one, I know we say we because of the United States of America, but um, actually, don't include me in the we because I wasn't there. I didn't do anything. Our country did. Our people of our country, our soldiers and the military and the leadership. You know, um, so I feel like there's this huge disconnect in history because we're not telling it from a personal story like what you're doing. So I think it's really important about that because then you go, oh, well, what war was that? What battle was that? Oh, I got to look this up. What's the Pacific Theater? No, it is not the Globe Theater with Shakespeare. There's all of this kind of I just think it's hard for people to wrap around wars without having a human connection to it. Don't you think? I mean, as a writer, I mean,
Oh yeah.
I, I just really think that, and then you don't realize what people go through. The Korean War has always been that quiet war. Okinawa battle, quiet. It's like the Battle of New Orleans. You know, I love that battle. And now, not that I love battles and want people to be dead, but that war is a quiet war in this country. Why don't people talk about that more? Don't you think that's one of the most pivotal battles we had in this country? That is quiet. Is
Yeah,
I know the Civil War is huge, but and the Battle of 1812, but the Battle of New Orleans, if we didn't win that, that would have changed everything as to what we know this country right now, I think, just
right.
personally.
Yeah, well, the War of 1812 it was absolutely a pivotal moment in American history, and that's why a lot of historians refer to it really as the Second War for American Independence. We had to fight that war and we had to win it because now we were technically a sovereign country, and now Britain was invading our homeland. The fact that they burned the White House and burned the Capitol building to the ground, would
Mm,
be enough to shake anybody up.
yeah.
Also there's the fact that the Battle of Baltimore, when they tried to take Fort McHenry, that was the inspiration for the Star Spangled Banner. And also the fact that we won a decisive victory against the British at the Battle of New Orleans. And I might be showing my age with this, or I might not be, but I can't think of the Battle of New Orleans without thinking about that old Johnny Horton song, that really put it into a pop culture format
Hmm.
that people could easily digest across all age demographics. And yeah, so I do think in a broader sense it tends to get overlooked, but it's no less critical at all to how we were shaped as a country. I also think of the Spanish American War. That war tends to be one that doesn't get as much press coverage as I think it should. But
Mm,
we look at it, for what it is. I mean, that really is what established the U.S. as a global power. Because now we had these overseas territories. We had a navy, in no small part due to the ongoing efforts of Teddy Roosevelt. That was able to project American, not only project American naval power, but project American diplomacy, the so-called gunboat diplomacy overseas. So yeah, it's always it's always a weird footnote to history how some of the most pivotal events in a country's history tend to get overshadowed by the bigger events, which, don't get me wrong,
yeah.
they're critical, but they just have more of the panache and more of the press coverage. And I guess in a sense, they're also more toyetic than some of the other conflicts.
Is it does now? Okay, we're gonna have to do a whole show on this now, because now I've got my brains all like, ee. But do you think when maybe they just didn't realize it was going to be that pivotal until you're in it, in the thick of that battle, which turns into, battle versus war. There's a whole thing, right?
Yeah.
There's a battle that there's skirmishes like, we were talking about this the other day with you. Cold War just it's still lingering. It's one
Yeah.
of those things that never goes away. Um, so I kind of feel like sometimes these battles, it's
Hmm.
if you just everyone, even you, everyone has this in some leg of their family somewhere, arm or limb of their family tree. Where look at the Hatfields and McCoys. Okay,
Right.
they're never going to stop until they're all dead. That's it.
Hmm.
Once they hate each other, that's it. Right.
Yeah.
So they can have a treaty and stop. Okay. And
Hmm.
I feel that is what happens in these battles. That's why I was asking about Okinawa going to Korea. And then, oh, here comes Vietnam. I just kind of go like, this is kind of an interesting trickle, thread. There's a little commonality or things like Okinawa. Do we hear a lot of that? Maybe it's just me not hearing a lot of it, but Korean War, not as much. Vietnam, heck yes. World War II, heck yes. World War One, absolutely. Then the Cold War. People go, oh, the Cold War. Do we know what the Cold War is, everyone? It's actually a bunch of battles, just like really Korea is tied to Vietnam, but Korea is also kind of tied into Okinawa and World War II, is kind of what I think. Is like, we're not, because if we go to the human psyche, just because there's a treaty means it's kind of like everybody needs to take a breath and reload, and then we're going to go back at it in a different way. I don't know. I'm just going from the human stuff. What do you think, Mike? It just doesn't feel like it's ever over.
Well, I reached back to a quote that I heard quite a long time ago that nations don't have permanent allies; they just have permanent interests. And in one form or
Ooh.
fashion, those interests are always going to be threatened by somebody else who has different interests. And it's always just a matter of time before some other conflict erupts. I also heard another analogy that I've taken to heart ever since. Somebody said wars are like Greyhound buses. There's always another one coming along.
Okay. All right. Well, I think, I may not know all my history, but I got a gist of it. This is the thing. So, do you think it's really learning the stories of people then that does really tie to all those quotes that you just said? Because battles are battles, and it's still humans wanting things. We look at what's going on in Israel and Palestine. We look at, Russia and Ukraine. Um, these are old wars
Mm,
resurfacing.
yeah.
So, just because your laundry's clean doesn't mean it's going to get dirty, not going to get dirty again. I'm just saying it goes back into the same cycle again. So I kind of, but people are involved. That's the point. And civilians get involved in all of it. And I
Yeah.
wonder about the ones that are not heard of as much just because maybe they were smaller, maybe they, turns into bloodier times than what was anticipated. So maybe there just wasn't as much media coverage, maybe not as many soldiers to come home or not come home. You know what I mean? So what what about that part of it? I mean, does the notoriety come from the media or the amount of people fighting?
Well, there's well, the notoriety is a function of a lot of things. I think the media does play a role in that because the media. I mean, even if we're talking about 19th century or even 18th century media, the stories that get told, and frequently the stories that make it into publications are the ones that are either written by the winners or the ones that are pieced together by the survivors. They,
Hmm.
when get those stories that get filtered out, yeah, they can produce a lot of the notoriety. But I think a lot of the notoriety is also a function of just what's at stake. Since for any conflict, and for wherever you have these battles, and certainly Okinawa was no exception. Very rarely do they ever happen in a vacuum, or very rarely do they ever happen by accident. It's
Mm.
it's typically a function of two competing armies, each with their own corps of officers and intelligence analysts and political cadre, were trying to trying to mold a specific objective that each side is trying to accomplish. And when they meet at the right intersection of space and time, like the American forces did with the Japanese forces at Okinawa, you had both sides who were putting in a lot of manpower and a lot of man hours into figuring out how to either defend or take this little chunk of the earth, because if it fell or if it stood, that would very well influence how the next battle and the next operation would play out after that. Because, yeah, going into it, both sides knew that Okinawa was going to be a big deal, because if it stood, the Japanese may have had a chance to stave off defeat for much longer. But
Mm.
if it fell and it fell unequivocally, then they knew it was only a matter of time before the Allies would arrive at their front shores. So that was what influenced a lot of the initial notoriety when it got reported in the press, and the multitude of books that have been written about Okinawa in the years since have capitalized on that in some form or fashion. And I also just remembered.
Mm.
the personal anecdotes that were provided over the years by the likes of historians and journalists like Robert Leckie. Leckie, that might be a name that's familiar to some of
Hmm.
your listeners out there, but he wrote about his experiences in, in the Pacific, and not only writing about his own experiences, but he also wrote a number of military history books thereafter. Um, he it, he wrote about the Battle of Okinawa, and his own personal experiences throughout the Pacific War became the basis of that HBO miniseries, The Pacific, that came out a few years back.
Okay.
Uh, yeah, so you see how you just see how the notoriety of the conflict itself and what both sides know are at stake influence how the story gets told in perpetuity thereafter.
Wow. And so when maybe the winner, I mean, that's the other thing. I mean, is the true story being told? That's the other part is the authenticity of what's being written, you know? And for you, with the research you do and being a historian as well and an educator, and then actually being able to interview some either family, read diaries. I mean, the research you do, um, how hard is that? Because you're also dealing with people's memories, right? Or hopefully they kept some kind of record, like a diary or a log of what was going on. So do you have to balance people's memories with act like this is what really went down according to historians,
Yeah.
like what's in museum kind of literature?
I sure do. So, what I have found is that for any number of interviews that I've conducted, especially interviews that are unit history, for instance, the book that I did on Eagle Troop and Ghost Troop at 73 Easting, is that the members of the unit that I interview, what I do is I piece together the timelines and I try to see if all the stories have the consistency. And
Mm,
uh, found is that 9 times out of 10 they do. There are just very few discrepancies here and there, which mostly I just account to age and the passing of time. I mean, when I started writing the book on Eagle Troop, all of the Desert Storm veterans who had fought in that conflict, by that time they were in their late 40s. So all of their memories were very sharp. Um, a,
mm,
a, few, a few discrepancies here and there. So what I do as a general rule, anytime I find those discrepancies, I do what I can to try to reconcile that against whatever is in the archival landscape. And if I can't distinguish something in a formal record from a certain discrepancy, what I do is I just try to go with whatever version is most commonly remembered by most of the unit members who were there, and and that generally serves, I think, as a failsafe because if I can say, okay, well, I talked to X amount of credible witnesses and people who were there to experience it, and they all remembered it this way. You may have a minority guy out there who says, "Well, kind of, but there's a little bit of a variation on it." Well, we'll keep that in a footnote, but unless there's an official record of it somewhere, just for the sake of storytelling and for the sake of the narrative flow, we'll retain whatever version is most commonly remembered. And
mm,
then you also get into a little bit of a divergence there because in the heat of battle, and I noticed this particularly when I was I was writing the book on Ghost Troop, is that recollections of the battle can often differ from different crewmen within the same vehicle. I mean, both guys are in the vehicle together. They're both firing at targets. They're both in that same point in space and time, and yet two guys who were sitting in the same turret have a different recollection of how things turned out.
wow.
So, yeah, so
Yeah,
it can be,
yeah. That's the same in doing family history.
yeah,
Everybody has a different story of the same incident. You know? Wow. Wow. I'm what a conversation, Mike. My gosh, we went from Okinawa to around the world. All kinds of wars today. But they
yeah.
are tied, and again goes to people. Is that why you focus on people? You hope people understand like the content, just number one about the soldiers themselves and
Yeah.
everybody involved. But do you think people learn more through people's stories versus what I was talking about with this war happened on this date, so many casualties, this is where it happened, and that's that, you know?
Yeah, I think when you add that human element in there, it really does make for a much more relatable story, and it serves as a reminder, just that whenever these conflicts happen, they're fought by people, and the people who bring these experiences home with them, they need to be told, and it needs to be a constant reminder that hey, this really is the human cost of war. Those who survive and those who come back, they always carry the scars with them. So in a roundabout way, the personal stories serve as a reminder, hey, when the cause is just, we should be willing to fight for it. But just remember, think twice before you have to send somebody into harm's way, because these are the downstream effects. These are the stories that they bring back. And, just make sure that if it does come to armed conflict, hey, yeah, if you have no other means to redress the problem that is happening, yeah, armed conflict is a solution, but by God, it should always be the last one.
Mm, good point.
All else fails.
Yeah, that's exactly it, right? Exactly. Well, thanks so much, Mike. Can't wait for next month. Wow, next
Me
month. What are
too.
we doing? Yeah, we're going to talk about Hispanic soldiers, right? That's what's coming
Yeah,
up for September.
that's right.
Okay.
We're going to be we're going to be exploring the contributions of many high profile Hispanic soldiers, and some extraordinary heroes therein.
Oh, I like that. Now, before you go, I know
Hmm.
you're I know you're working on more books. What's coming up
Yeah.
next?
Okay, so the next project that is going to be released this year, that is Red Bandit, and that is a combat history of the MiG 29. And for Red Bandit, this is going to be the same general format and story structure as Tomcat Fury and Wings of Fire. Looking at a photographic, well, I say photographic history. It's an illustrated history. It's very heavy on both text and illustrations that just give the combat history of the MiG 29. And I think the readers are going to get a lot out of this, because I had actually started the project right before the war in Ukraine kicked off, and that precipitated, I guess, a tactical pause, if you will, on my end, because I said, okay, well, before I get too far into the history of the MiG 29, I need to have some more MiG 29 operations to record and make a part of this book, because history is being made right in front of us with the Russia Ukraine war.
Mm-hmm. That's true. I kept hearing
Mhm.
about that too. I'm going,
Yeah.
Mike, stuff's going on. I'm like, I know, I actually understand the news more now. Thank you to you. It's like, I know what they're talking about. Before I didn't. I'm like, I don't know what they're talking about. And they're talking about these things, MiGs and F this. It's
Yeah.
F-15 or 14. It didn't mean it the other way. That sounded bad. Um, but yeah, I mean, normally I'd go, well, what is that? So now I know, which is amazing. I have to tell you, we were in Madison, Wisconsin recently, and I forgot about those F-14s, man. Holy cow. You know, you can feel those flying over, and they have them. And, I think the residents kind of complain a lot, but when they come over, that is a whole experience when they fly over you. Um, wow. Like, seriously, have you felt that? When an F-14 flies over you?
Yeah, any kind of tactical jet, when it flies over you, you most definitely feel it. The first experience I had on that was when there was a low flying F-16 that flew over where I was, and I don't know exactly how high in altitude it was, but it had to have been less than 1,000 feet, because it was pretty close to the ground. And I
Oh
remember
boy,
uh,
man.
it was flying so close to the ground that I could literally feel the heat of the afterburner.
Wow. Wow, wow, wow. Mm-mm. No, that's hot.
Mm.
That so they really do fly hot. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So
Uh-huh.
yeah. Wow. Wow. Okay, well, can't wait for the next one. Everyone, MikeGuardia.com is the website to go to. And of course, go to Amazon, all those great places. You can get his books there. And I think we need to have military history bookshops now. I'm starting to think that, you know.
It'd be great.
And yeah, and I really hope people listen that don't always, think about military history because we have to understand it. We have to learn it to understand what's going on now. That's
Yeah.
the point. It really is important. And then that's another reason why I'm so glad you write about people and also the armor, because that part is really crucial. I just did an interview. You know how we're involved with the Jefferson Highway, which
Right.
runs from Winnipeg down through New Orleans. It's one of the oldest, it's America's first vacation route. And this highway, the history of it is intense, man. It's got outlaws like Bonnie and Clyde and Jesse James, but a lot of military history. As you spoke on one of the shows that we do with the Jefferson Highway, like
Yeah.
that fort right around the corner from your house in Minnesota, right?
Yeah.
And they are doing a military vehicle preservation association. They are doing a convoy from Minnesota to New Orleans.
Mm.
How crazy is that? Like all these, and the one of the gentlemen, John Varner, came on. He has like the hospital truck, like little van thing, little Jeep, hospital Jeep, the medic
Uh-huh.
Jeep, like exactly the same one from MASH, the TV
Mm.
show MASH. Like, so again, MASH was not in Vietnam, y'all. It was Korea War, right? Am I getting that right, Mike? Just to
Yeah.
remind everyone.
Yep, that's correct.
So yeah, so they are all in convoy going down this historic route and they try to avoid the cities, obviously. They have to even go and measure bridges because they're going through small towns if they can go over the bridges with all
Yeah.
of this armor. Old Jeeps, medical vehicles, all of it going. And I asked them about tanks for you, and they said, no, that does not occur. That would not be working. Yeah, that does not happen. No one's taking tanks out. Um, but they are doing this whole thing for the entire month of October, October 1st through 31st, taking these tanks, not tanks, sorry, Jeeps and military vehicles on the road. And so what's interesting is Eisenhower was actually born in a community on the Jefferson Highway. Don't ask me which one it is right now, but I know it, but I just can't remember it. Um, but the history of World War II, the Louisiana maneuvers, I still want to do a show on that. So they're going through all these areas where so much military history happened. And at one point, and I can't remember what battle it is, but this highway was actually thought of as an escape route if all hell went sour in this country, to use this as an escape route to Canada. How about that?
Yeah.
This highway. It's crazy. So, anyway, just thinking of you with all that armor and talking to these gentlemen with these collectors who are mostly veterans and they're going to American legions as they travel,
Mhm.
um, which is so important because they're saying we're starting to lose our American legions, and so they're hoping that also kind of contributes to getting people out to them and supporting them. Do you think American legions will still stick around? You
Oh, of
know?
course.
Okay, good. I'm glad you think that and feel that because there's that little fear of like, will they still be here? So they'll be doing that all the way through and showing off these vehicles. But these gentlemen, and there's women involved too, take care of these vehicles like you would a classic car, you know, which is pretty cool to do. And they just take care of them, they parade them, they show them, and bring the history around. And then when I was looking at them, it ties into what we're talking about today. Those vehicles aren't that comfortable from what I'm looking at. It's not a soft, cushy ride when you're going to war in any of
No,
those.
no.
No. So um, I encourage people to go and check that out and go to jeffersonhighway.org to check that out, that route, because that is pretty epic. And Mike, it'll be in your backyard. You've got to go see them when they go take off. It's so cool. But thanks again, everyone. Thank you for listening here. We're here every first Monday with Mike Guardia, and you can keep up with him at MikeGuardia.com. Thanks so much, Mike.
Well, thank you, Lisa. Always a pleasure to be on the show.
Thank you for listening to Big Blend Radio's Military Monday show featuring Mike Guardia, award-winning author and historian. Keep up with Mike and his books at MikeGuardia.com. Follow us at BigBlendRadio.com.